Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to read some more in our book, A Bear Named Trouble by Marion Dane Bauer, and we are almost to the very end. We have 2 more chapters, and that's it, and then we'll be finished with our book. So if you think back to last week, you will remember that Jonathan had called the news station. He was so upset that Trouble had killed Mama Goose, and he called the news station to report that there was a murderer in town. The news station comes down to do a story, and that's when he realizes that he may have made a big mistake, because getting the news involved meant getting the Fish and Wildlife department involved. And Jonathan's dad says if they catch Trouble, they're gonna kill him. So Jonathan, against his dad's instruction, like always, goes into the zoo and is trying to help Trouble escape so that he doesn't get caught. Same Jonathan that was mad and wanted to get rid of him is now trying to help him. So that is where we are now. So now we are on chapter 13, and the title of chapter 13 is A Lot Like Us. So what do you think that's going to mean? A lot like us. Jonathan sat up in bed listening. The neighbors surrounding the zoo would be complaining again. It had been almost a week since Trouble was captured, and he still banged around inside his enclosure, bellowing and moaning day and night. Remember at the end of chapter 12, Trouble was shot, but with the tranquilizer gun, not a bullet. So they just kind of knocked him out so they could capture him. He did not get killed, but they did use a tranquilizer dart and capture him that way. Was he, Jonathan, responsible for that too? The fact that Trouble was miserable being confined, that the neighbors were being disturbed? No, not even his father would blame him for those things, though he had blamed him, it seemed, for everything else. The TV reporters being there, the fish and game people, but mostly Dad blamed Jonathan for being inside the zoo instead of the school bus, for putting himself in danger to keep Trouble from rushing through the gate or back under the fence to be killed. It didn't matter that everything had turned out all right. It didn't matter that Trouble hadn't had to be put down. Remember what put down means. We talked about that if the fish and game people got him, that they would put him down, which means they would have to kill him. Trouble hadn't had to be put down, that the television reporter had made the zoo personnel all look like heroes, that Jonathan hadn't been touched, not so much as a nick from those long curving claws, those sharp teeth. At first his father had been almost too angry to even notice that everything was okay. But then the relief had seeped in. Relief for Trouble, of course. His father truly didn't want to see the bear killed, but mostly relief that Jonathan hadn't been hurt. While the others went for a pallet to carry the drugged bear out of the ravine and into the den of the old polar bear exhibit where he could be held for a while, Dad had grabbed Jonathan, pulled him up into the front of his denim jacket and burst into rough tears. So why do you think Jonathan's dad was crying? Once he knew that the bear was taken care of, he grabs Jonathan up and holds him tight and is crying. So think about how you think Jonathan's dad is feeling. How could you, he said over and over again, how could you? You might have been killed. So you think Jonathan's dad, do you think he's crying because he's sad, or because he's angry, or because he was scared? Think about how he's feeling. And even Jonathan knew what his father said was true. When he had stood almost nose to nose with Trouble, when he had seen the desperation in the bear's eyes, he knew that he had made the wrong choice. The young brownie might have swung at him as easily as he had at Mama Goose, and the boy would have about as much chance against such a blow as a too noisy goose. Everything had worked out, yes, but still he knew that he had made the wrong choice. So he did what he thought was best in the moment, but now, as he looks back, he realizes that things could have ended a lot differently. And how glad he was to be alive, to know it. Another roar from the captive Trouble reverberated through the neighborhood. Jonathan pulled the covers up to his chin, closed his eyes, and settled more deeply into his warm bed. Then slowly, silently, he let himself slip inside the bear. He let 4 strong legs carry him from one side of the concrete enclosure to the other. Let Trouble's panic, his deep longing reverberate through his body. Animals, he was explaining to Rhonda just before he finally slept, are a lot like us. They want just like us. So this is where the title of our chapter comes from. Remember, the title is A Lot Like Us. So in what ways are animals a lot like us as people? Though Trouble's stomach was always full, the days he spent confined in the concrete room seemed to have no end. He had no knowledge of the negotiations that were going on, the reaching out to zoos all over the world to find a new home for him, nor would he have been impressed if anyone could have made him understand what these humans were doing. He wanted only what he had wanted since his mother sent him away, his old life back. So he has pretty much been sad ever since his mother shunned him and pushed him away. He's been sad and struggling ever since that point, and he still is now that he's in that concrete enclosure at the zoo. The day that one of the humans laid down a path of fig Newtons, Trouble followed the path out of the concrete room, slurping one cookie after another without noticing where they led. An interesting new taste he approved. You guys, have you ever eaten fig Newtons? Those are good. What he did not approve of was the small cage he found himself confined to after the last fig Newton had disappeared, but he soon became sleepy. The cookies had been laced with Valium. So inside the fig Newton cookies, they had put a little Valium, a little medicine to make him sleepy. And he was snoring mightily when the wooden crate was loaded into the belly of the passenger jet. He slept so soundly, in fact, that he didn't catch a whiff of the 40,000 pounds of fresh salmon that had been loaded into the hold of the plane with him. The delicious aroma didn't even penetrate his consciousness yet. When the Valium finally wore off and the young bear woke, he was many thousands of feet up in the air, somewhere over Canada. Remember, he was in Alaska before, and now he's going east into Canada. And then, of course, he smelled the salmon. When the familiar and delicious aroma reached his nose, he proceeded to bang, to thump, to rattle his cage. He moaned and roared, and he made such a commotion that the pilot had no choice but to come on the intercom with an explanation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "don't worry about the noise you hear. You see, we have a very special passenger on board of this flight, and by the way, his name is Trouble." So our next chapter that we read tomorrow will be Home. This is the last chapter, chapter 14, Home. So knowing that Trouble is on an airplane traveling somewhere, and knowing that the next chapter's name is Home, what do you think that means? Who's home? Where do you think the home is? So make a prediction for the next chapter, and then tomorrow we're gonna finish our book. Bye.